Welcome to my channel. Here's today's eerie story. Colorado, a vast and unforgiving land nestled in the mountain west of the United States. In its shadowy wilderness, behind the snow-laced San Juan Mountains, whispers of gold lured men into madness. In November 1873, 20 fortune seekers, strangers to one another, set out toward Breckenridge, where word had spread of rich gold deposits. The journey would be brutal, made even more reckless by the season. Winter was tightening its icy grip. 25 miles into their trek, they met a man on the trail near a place called Provo, a 23-year-old named Alfred Packer. After they told him they were headed to the gold country of the San Juan Mountains, Packer said he would like to join them, saying he was both a prospector and a guide, and that he knew the San Juan territory well. As he had no provisions, he offered $25 to join the team. The group, who needed a guide, accepted Packer's help, but the journey was slow and torturous. Snow buried the trails, visibility waned, and they became lost more than once. Supplies vanished quickly, forcing them to eat the horses' feed. When that, too, ran out, they began to eye the animals themselves. The cold gnawed at their bones, and hunger blurred their thoughts. On January 21, 1874, they stumbled into a valley near Montrose, Colorado, half-starved and near collapse. There, unexpectedly, they found salvation. A nearby Ute Indian tribe welcomed them. The tribe's leader, Chief Ouray, offered food, fire, and shelter. Despite the long history of betrayal and brutality, his people had suffered at the hands of white settlers. The generosity stunned the men. Chief Ouray listened patiently to the group's plans and strongly advised them to wait until spring. The mountain passes were deadly this time of year, he warned. He offered to let them stay with his tribe and promised that they would share everything they had. 9 of the men agreed. But the other 11, including Packer, were restless and unwilling to wait. Unable to change their minds, Ouray gave them food and directions to follow the safer route along the Gunnison River. He warned them firmly, do not attempt to cross the mountains directly. Packer, though, had other ideas. He convinced 5 of the men that a shorter route through the mountains, a route he personally knew, would save time and lead them straight to the gold. Trusting him, they left the rest behind and followed him into the high, frozen wilderness. What happened next would remain buried in snow and silence for 2 months. Then, on April 16, 1874, the staff at the Los Pinos Indian Agency near Saguache, Colorado, were interrupted during breakfast by a frantic knock at the door. They opened it to find a disheveled man, legs wrapped in filthy bandages, begging for food and shelter. It was Alfred Packer. He carried a rifle, a knife, a steel coffee pot, and a satchel. When the men sat Packer down at the table and gave him some food, he could not ingest it without vomiting. His digestion, he explained, had changed from prolonged starvation. He asked eagerly whether any of his group had arrived ahead of him. When the answer came, a quiet no, his face fell. The men at the agency listened to his story, but found it rather odd that even though he had been lost in the wilderness for a little over 2 months, he did not look as malnourished and threadbare as most lost wanderers they had come across in the mountains. His face was reported as being bloated, and his overall physique hardly skeletal. No one organized a search. Everyone assumed the 5 men were long dead, buried under the snow. That assumption held until spring. In August of the same year, a painter named Juan was hiking near Slumgullion Pass in Colorado. A foul smell drifting through the hemlock trees drew his attention. What he found stopped him cold. On the forest floor lay 5 bodies in varying states of decomposition. One had been decapitated. The others bore deep gashes on their backs, brutal, sharp blows. The chests and thighs had been cleanly cut, like meat butchered from animals. Horrified, John turned to flee, but something caught his eye, a narrow path, almost hidden, leading into the woods. He followed it. Not far from the bodies stood a small cabin. The door creaked open. Inside, the scene was chilling. There were signs of someone having lived there recently. Scraps of food, scattered belongings, a fire pit, and the unmistakable signs that human flesh had been cooked. John fled and reported everything to the nearest authorities. His sketch of the scene helped launch the investigation. Soon, the police learned that the rest of the original expedition, the 9 who had stayed with Chief Urey, had reached safety. They remembered the experiences they had with Packer during the journey earlier. They said he must have possibly fabricated his qualifications as a guide. Throughout the course of their journey, he was reported as being greedy with rations, lazy, and obstinate. He apparently was obsessed with how much money the members had brought with them for the journey. He was reported to have quarreled constantly. Moreover, there were rumors about Packer having spent time in jail in Salt Lake City, on the charge of having murdered a hunting partner. Their testimonies supported what was now obvious. Something terrible had happened in the mountains. The man responsible was already known. He had walked into their lives months earlier, half dead and hungry. Alfred Packer was arrested. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The rifle, the knife, the satchel, and even the coffee pot in his possession had belonged to the other men. He was also carrying multiple wallets, each with someone else's name. And money, far more than a man who had supposedly been abandoned in the mountains should have. Under questioning, Packer gave a new story. He claimed that one of the men had gone mad and killed the others. Packer said he had only killed that man in self-defense, and that the rest were already dead. But the story didn't add up. And there was one thing he never denied. He had eaten them. He described the act without shame, even noting which parts he liked best. The chest meat, he said, was especially tasty. In fact, it was the reason why, when he first arrived at the Indian Agency, he had been so disgusted by the food. He had already grown accustomed to the taste of human flesh. The court didn't need much more. Packer was sentenced to death, though the sentence was later commuted to 40 years in prison, the longest ever handed down in Colorado at that time. Years later, Alfred Packer was released on parole. He lived out his final years quietly. Rumor has it he became a vegetarian, perhaps out of guilt or perhaps because no other meat would compare. He died of a stroke in 1907. To this day, the story of Alfred Packer echoes in the mountains of Colorado, a man who crossed a line most never imagine and never came all the way back. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe. And remember, darkness is never far away. Until next time,